Hi there, I'm Alan Zundell, and this show is Political Dharma. Rather than giving you my usual weekend update on the news from the standpoint of politics outside the dominating two parties, today I'm going to go into a little more detail and explaining the idea I've been promoting for a different kind of alternative political party to challenge the two parties, the two major parties in the United States. Now, this would be an organization throughout the various states of the United States that functions like a political party in the sense that it will endorse or nominate candidates for public office. Now, I say endorse or nominate because first off, it would be trying to endorse because it wouldn't have the strength to get ballot access and nominate candidates directly to the ballot, but also because in the various states, it might be more advantageous to nominate candidates as its own candidates or to simply endorse candidates rather than trying to get them on the ballot. So it would either nominate or endorse candidates for public office, but it would not be like your usual political party in that it would not have a specific ideological or policy platform focus. That is, it would be open to various points of view and various ideas about policy, be open to all candidates, those of alternative parties and independent candidates as well, just not the candidates of the major parties. And the reason is it is intended to be a way to consolidate support around candidates who have the best chance of challenging the two-party system and building the broadest amount of support for those candidates. All right, so that's the basic idea. It's like a political party in that it endorses or nominates candidates for office, but it's not like your usual political party because it does not have any ideology or policy focus other than being an alternative to the major parties in which a candidate can emerge who has the broadest support from all the voters who are dissatisfied with the major parties. That's a general idea. Now, why do I think this is important? Over the last 50 years, that is most of my adult lifetime, all of my adult lifetime, really, there's been increasing dissatisfaction with the two major parties. And we can see this specifically in how, in public opinion polls, people say they are unhappy with both the major parties and their candidates for president in particular, and also in how people no longer identify with one party or the other when they're asked which party they belong to or prefer. So you also see that part reflected in voter registration statistics where fewer and fewer people register as members of the Democrats or Republicans, and more are registering as independents, which they call different things in different states. It could be independent, could be no party preference. It could be no non-affiliated voter. So there's a variety of terms, but the idea is they don't affiliate with either major political party. Now, why is that happening? I think it's happening because over that last time span, people in the United States have seen their quality of life deteriorate. A lot of social indicators are getting worse. And for a big segment of the population, maybe even a majority, they've seen their financial prospects become worse and worse. Not only their prospects, but their financial situation get worse. So there is a lot of built-in unhappiness when they see the two major parties. Neither of them seems to be able to alter the course of the country in a way that people feel is improving their situation in life. So when you have this built-up voter dissatisfaction with two parties that seem to be the main choice, but are not really capable of fixing the problems, then you have a volatile situation that could eventually result in social breakdown. Now, why are the two major parties not able to address this? Well, rather than go into that, what I want to talk about first is that why do we have a two-party system? Why are only two major parties able to capture most of the votes in this system? The fundamental reason why we have a two-party system in the United States, it wasn't intended by the founders or the authors of the Constitution. It was really an outgrowth of the fact that we have a lot of important offices that are held by a single person, most preeminently the presidency. And when you have elections to elect just one person, there's a natural tendency for the people who support that candidate to coalesce in further supporting that candidate and candidates affiliated with that candidate, and for the people who are not happy with that candidate or that candidate's allies to coalesce to try to create a majority or a larger coalition to throw that candidate out of office. So there's a natural tendency for two sides to build up, one for the incumbents, one against the incumbents, and they coalesce into two major parties. That's the dynamic of a single office holder. Now it's buttressed, and it's been further buttressed over time by a variety of election laws. Our voting method, first of all, in which you can only pick one candidate. As a voter, you can only pick one candidate, so you have to really decide, am I going to vote for one of these parties that seems to be the only viable parties, or am I going to go with a party that doesn't seem to have any chance of winning? So that builds an inertia in voters to stick with the major parties, even if they're unhappy with it, because they think if I go with a minor party, it's just my vote is not going to matter in the outcome. And I'm not happy with either party. What most people actually do is not vote at all. So there's more of a tendency to drop out or to pick one of the major parties as a lesser evil than to turn to one of the alternative political parties, which remain on the margins. Now, I started to say there's also a variety of laws passed by people from the two major parties, which make it harder and harder for third parties to get on the ballot or to get attention by the media because they are not on the ballot or because they're not attracting much voter support, or for independents to get on the ballot. So there's a lot of barriers to these alternative parties, and they kind of feed on themselves. In other words, it's a vicious cycle of the two major parties having the role of creating election laws and of the various kinds, and they use their power to try to block alternative parties from having any influence. So there's a blockage of alternative parties, and people tend to stick with the two major parties or just drop out entirely. So let me reiterate those things. Okay, there's a two-party system because important political offices are held by one person. We're not going to change that feature very easily unless we change the Constitution. That there's a voter inertia in favor of the two parties because they see those as the only viable ones. And then there's barriers to alternative parties. Now, the usual path to change in a two-party system, because alternative parties don't have much of a chance of gaining traction, is that one of the major parties, seeing that it's not able to build an enduring majority and institute its policies, to show the public that it has a viable program and to convince more voters to back them, one of them is going to see, okay, we're in a stalemate like we have been for a long time in this country, where the two parties seem to be evenly matched in voter support, and voters tend to, swing voters tend to just move from one to the other, thinking, okay, the ones in power don't seem to be fixing things, so we'll try the other party. Well, they're not fixing things, so let's try the other party. So there's a handful of voters who stick with the major parties because they really believe in their programs, but there's a larger group of people who aren't happy with either party and simply drop out. And then there's a smaller set of voters who stay in the game and kind of swing from one to the other. But nobody's entirely happy because neither of the major parties seem to be able to, number one, come up with a program that convinces enough people to give them an enduring majority, and number two, because neither of them are convincing voters that they have a program that's going to make a difference. Was that the same thing? I don't recall, but you get the point. Either I reaffirmed the point or I gave you two different points. Not sure now. So usual path to change is one of the parties, some faction within the party or some faction who enters the party from outside will say, look, this is not working. We're not able to build an enduring majority. We keep losing office periodically. Sometimes we win, but just as often we lose. So we need to change of direction. So they'll come in and make a big change in direction of a major party. That's what's happened to the Republican Party in recent years with the whole MAGA movement and Donald Trump. He's come in with a entirely different vision than the previous Republican Party had. Not entirely different, but a very radically changed a radical change in direction for the party, and he's coming in and he took over the party. Now, whether this proves over time that it's going to attract a majority of voters because he can actually fix problems, and then Republicans will have an enduring majority and be able to institute their policies and show people that it can work, or he's going to fail and we'll end up either in the same situation or with the Democrats finding a way to revitalize their party. So I don't think it's likely that at this point, from what I see, Trump is actually going to fix problems. I think he's going to cause a lot of people to have second thoughts, and people's situation is not going to improve in any way that they can see visibly. So they're going to next turn to the Democrats again, and either we'll have that dynamic back and forth continuing, or the Democrats themselves will, in response to Trump, find a way to revitalize themselves. That is, they'll take a different direction themselves. But I don't see much sign of that happening. They've really insulated themselves from insurgent movements within the party, like Bernie Sanders and the whole progressive movement. They've coalesced around politicians who support continuing in the same direction rather than trying to find a radically different course, or one that's different enough to convince voters that they have something worth trying. So that's what's happening, is some voters stick with the major parties and they keep trying to build a majority big enough to dominate over the other party. Some voters within the major parties are trying to get in and change the direction, but not having much success with the Democrats and coming up with something new in the Republicans. But it remains to be seen whether either of these is going to really take hold. I doubt that either will, and mostly because I don't think either party shows a program that convinces me that they can actually fix the social problems and the economic problems that people have been experiencing for a long time. So what about third parties? Well, the other alternative, the way that things change in the past, has been that a new party, or a party that's been around a little bit, is able to gain more voter attention and build a strong enough movement in order to force one of the major parties to change by incorporating the new party's platform into their own platform. Or if neither of the major parties is able to adapt and incorporate that movement may actually replace one of the major parties. That's happened occasionally in our history. It's more frequently happened that a big movement like the populist movement, for example, can take hold. And then with the progressive movement was kind of similar to it in the early 20th century. It was big enough to force a change in the Democratic Party, Republican Party as well, for that matter, with the progressives. Anyway, one of the major parties took over its platform and was able to continue on from there. Same thing happened in the New Deal in the 1930s. Socialists and communists were gaining strength. So Franklin Roosevelt came in and he adapted some of their program to what he was doing. And they were able to build a majority that lasted for quite a long time. So if third parties are able to build strength, they could either force a change in a major party or sometimes replace a party, as happened a couple of times in our history. Republican Party, when it was a new party. Early on, there was another party replaced, the Whig Party replaced the Federalists. Anyway, you get the idea. So it's harder now that because of all the ballot access issues and the voting system, the way it's become entrenched, it's harder for third parties to get any traction to build that kind of support. And also because the third parties we have now have not really shown that their programs do generate a lot of interest. They don't seem to be convincing voters that they have the answer. Now, it's true that they're not able to get enough media attention to get their program in front of voters. It's also true that if voters see them as marginal, they're not going to pay attention to their programs. So maybe they've got good programs, but they just have not been able to get it out in front of the public, or are far from being able to win office and demonstrate how their program could maybe help things get better. So all that's true, but it's still the case that those parties have not been able to build enough support on their own. So we have a variety of efforts to do this, and each of these alternative parties, like the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, and new parties that are trying to coalesce independent voters into some kind of centrist party like the No Labels effort. And I think the Forward Party fits here a little bit as well. Um, None of them have been able to gain traction. So what they've turned to is voting reform in order to open up the system to make it more possible for them to get more attention and maybe build support and show that they have the means to, they have the ideas that voters should trust, and they have the means to actually get into office and institute their program to show how it would work. Okay, so there's a lot of barriers to those parties getting anywhere, and we see this continued hope election after election that these parties are going to build support, but they seem to grow a little bit stronger and then they fall back again, grow up again and then fall back again. So none of them have really been able to grow to a point. So what a lot of them have turned to is voting reform. Now the problem here, and I've worked on this for a good 20 years or more than that, 25 years, I think, about 20 years, a little longer. Voting reform efforts, the leading ones are ranked choice voting and the so-called open primaries, two forms of open primaries. One which is simply allowing independents to pick a party to vote in their primary. The other is an all candidate primary in which all the candidates run together and all the voters can vote for any one of them. These are two of the biggest movements. And we saw in the last election, they had a big setback in all the states where they had these types of reforms on the ballot, one or the other or some combination. None of them passed. So they seem to be stalled. And also, there's a lot of other alternatives out there that point out the flaws in these two types of voting reform efforts. There are, for example, proponents of proportional representation. There are star voting advocates like myself, approval voting, score voting. There's people who want to focus more on ballot access issues. So the voting reform community is scattered among different efforts. And that's why when I'm trying to create this alternative party, I have picked a system that I think is a good one rather than saying, well, let's start a party using an alternative voting method and let's debate which method to use. I think that debate could go on for a long time and never get anywhere. The other option available was to say, I've looked into this. I think this is the best method we could be using. Now, if you have an alternative, propose it and we can discuss it and see if one of us convinces the other. But you got to start with something rather than just more talking that doesn't get anywhere. So the idea of the third party project that I'm proposing, once again, is to have this organization that allows all independent and alternative party candidates to run in one election. In fact, you don't even have to ask them. You just put them on your ballot initially because you're doing an endorsement process rather than trying to get on the ballot. So you put all the candidates for an office on your ballot, and then you use star voting in order to allow independent voters and third-party voters, alternative party voters, to all vote together. Now, what this will do for these candidates and these alternative parties is that it will allow the candidates to compete with each other in a public forum, which they might not have if they're not able to get on the ballot for the general election. So it allows some ability of them to reach people they wouldn't ordinarily reach by trying to gain voters from among those various voters that are all open, that are all allowed to vote within this election in an attempt to get this endorsement. It would be a way for them to compete against each other, find how their message can be honed to attract more voters, find how they can build coalitions among people from other points of view. And, whoever comes out of this process with the most voter support would be in the best position to challenge the two major parties. So, number one, it allows minor parties exposure to more people, ability to hone their message, ability to build better, stronger coalitions. It allows independent candidates the same kind of opportunities. And maybe even if this organization does get ballot access, it allows independents a path to getting on the ballot more easily. If they can win your nomination process, then they can get on the ballot. They don't have to go around gathering signatures and all that kind of thing. Would increase public interest in alternative parties and independent candidates by, doing this in a public way and letting a lot of people know what's happening, and all the parties are participating so they can each tell their members what's going on. So it would build some public interest in all these alternative candidates. It would also hopefully demonstrate the effectiveness of a voting system, of an alternative voting system. Star voting is the one that I'm recommending to start off with. With star voting, here's how it would work. Just very briefly, the voters can give a score to any of the candidates they want of 0 to 5. 0 meaning they least like that candidate to win, 5 meaning they most like that candidate to win. They can give them a score anywhere from 0 to 5. They can give candidates the same score if they like them equally. And then the voting tabulation is done in a simple two-step process. The first step is to add up the scores for each candidate. That shows their overall level of support. Whichever candidates get the highest numbers, it shows a lot of voter support. The top two, then you assess using the same ballots which of those two was preferred by the most voters. And that would be shown on the ballot by which one the voter gave the higher score to. So rather than using aggregate scores, you're simply saying which of these top two that got the highest scores now in the second round of counting is preferred by the most voters. So that becomes one person, one vote, and it shows, and it gives an incentive for people to vote honestly as well. Produces a candidate who should have not only high support in a small faction of voters, but high and broad support among a variety of voters because they're able to weigh in on the different candidates and give varying levels of support. So I hope I've explained this in a little more detail, why I think this project is important, why I think it is a way out of the dilemmas of alternative parties and independent candidates are facing, and why I think it would actually produce candidates who have a good chance of challenging the major parties and thus either pushing them in a different direction if you're getting enough voter support for your ideas, or to eventually replacing them with a different party that's able to gain a lot of voter support. That's the idea in a nutshell. I welcome your questions and comments in the comments section. Again, on the weekend, I'll have an update of the news for this week. And that's about it for right now. Thanks a lot for watching. Subscribe, like, share. I'm losing my voice. All right. Bye.